from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
Absolutely. I think that it is definitely, I was even victim to this stigma that Black people do not die by suicide. I think there's a myth that exists both within and outside of the community. If you look at larger statistics, right? Yes, white men are still driving a lot of these suicide rates. But if you look within the groups, you actually see that suicide rates, death rates have increased 182% from 2001 to 2017 for Black girls. 182%. And that is according to a study published in 2019. You're also seeing that suicide, again, amongst Black youth and young adults are rising to the second leading cause of death, right? And so just alarming statistics that, again, how?
Hold on, Jasmin, you said, what is the second leading cause of death amongst which demographic?
Suicide amongst Black youth and young adults. And young adults broadly as well, right? We're seeing that just a leading cause of death across the board for children and young adults is suicide. And we are going to blame mental health. We're not going to blame these access to guns, access to violence. We're not going to blame systemic concerns here when we see this in children and young adults.
Yeah, wow, that is a second leading cause of death. I want to bring into the conversation now April Simpkins. She's a mental health advocate. She's an entrepreneur, a mother, a wife, and she became more visible after her daughter, Chesley Chris, died by suicide earlier this year. Good morning, April.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for joining me again. You and I had a chance to talk about this in February as a part of a series that I was doing on the state of Black women. And you shared just so powerfully your story and Chesley's story with a suicide. First, I just want to ask you, how are you doing and how are the kids doing and your family?
Thank you so much for asking. I'm doing well. I'm still, taking it one day at a time. But I'm doing well. So I appreciate you asking. The kids are also doing well. I really appreciate that they are each seeking counseling. I'd have older children, and then, of course, I have two younger children. And I do applaud them for taking that step and maintaining a relationship with a counselor, which I think is crucial. And to the point that was earlier made, for some reason, I think even seeking counseling is sometimes stigmatized in our Black community. We turn to prayer, pray it away. And while I think faith is so important, you can have your faith and you can have a counselor too. The two can coexist in your life to help you with your mental health or challenges.
April, did you know that suicide was the second leading cause of death amongst young African Americans? I mean, I did not know that. I mean, that is just like shocking to me.
I did know that. I learned that this year. Of course, I'm an ambassador for the National Alliance for Mental Illness, and working with NAMI, there's so many statistics that I found alarming, but did make myself aware of.
Wow. Just briefly, April, I know that Chesley, before she died earlier this year, she had struggled with depression and had attempted suicide even before 2022. Can you tell us what that experience was like for her and you as her mother?
Yes, it was alarming and traumatizing, just for me as her mom. And I knew that Chesley was a hard worker. She was a high achiever. And, I think in all of the work I've done to understand better high functioning depression, it was easy to assume that she was just buried in things. And it wasn't until after her first attempt that she and I had some really serious conversations. I learned after that how to really be a support and not try to be a savior. And in doing that, it opened up a whole different kind of conversation with she and I.
Yeah, you said high achiever. That's a understatement. We know that Chesley was, I'm so proud because she was a lawyer.
Yeah.
She's a JD MBA, as a matter of fact, and my daughter is pursuing a similar path in terms of JD MBA. She was a beauty queen. She was a philanthropist. She was civically engaged, volunteered with nonprofit organizations, really focused on helping others in her community. So she was a role model. Even though she's just 29 years old, she had done so much in her short period on this earth. Jasmin, but I heard April say that she learned how to be a supporter and not a savior. Help us understand what that means, because I think so many of us feel like when someone is sick, whether it's with a mental illness or physical illness, that our job is to save them.
Yeah. And I think, and again, I don't want to speak for you, April, so I'm very curious your thoughts as well. But when I approach a savior versus a supporter, a savior takes that responsibility, right? Takes that blame that so often we can put on ourselves, that it's our job to fix it. Mm-hmm. We can't fix it. We can support and we can provide love. We can provide access to resources. We can provide validation, but we can't fix it, right? We can't wave a wand and make someone who's high functioning, right? Like you're saying, where we can't even see the signs, right? So it's like, how as an outsider, when we can't see the signs, are we going to be a savior, right? I think that's even more important to highlight the difference there. And so again, when I view supporter, I view as, again, showering with those protective factors, showering with love and validation, resources as needed. That's my opinion of how I see the difference.
Is that how you view, April, when you said you had to learn how to be a supporter and not a savior?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I share that often. There's so many who thought, why didn't she talk to me? And it's almost like they're saying, if I had talked to her, I could have saved her. And I think to allow them to process that and know that, you know, the support you did provide was the support she needed, whether that was a hug, a kind word, good conversation, going with her somewhere, accountability, a dinner. All of those things count as support. And people did that for her. And I want to always tell them thank you for the support they provided. She got what she needed from them. If she needed more, she would have asked for it.
Wow. So, April, I don't know if people intend for this to be like, you know, trying to impose guilt on you or even blame. But how do you interpret that when people say, you know, did you talk to her? Or, you know, did you notice the signs? And maybe people are trying to be helpful. I don't think people are malicious intentionally, but part of that could be like some shade in there. I mean, how do you feel when those questions come at you like that?
You know, I have had questions. I've had people say, well, if you guys were so close, how come you didn't know? And, you know, mental illness it's so broad. And again, there are a number of things I could say. One, if Chesley didn't want to talk about something, Chesley didn't talk about it. Chesley knew the art of deflection, which is why so many of her friends didn't know. They would say, Chesley, how are you? And she would say, I'm fine. How are you doing? And then she would talk about that person. And it's not that she did those things with me. There was a prior attempt. I knew that Chesley was battling. But again, I knew what she needed from me was support. I wish, as her mother, I could have climbed inside of her and hit a switch or something to change that. But I knew, honestly, in my head and my heart, that I could not change that. And so I was talking to my husband about this yesterday, and I said, when Chesley passed, I felt an overwhelming sense of grief and sadness, but guilt wasn't something that I felt, because I knew as a mother, I put it all out there. I literally, with my whole chest, gave everything that I had.
Wow. Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I do think there's this notion that people have that someone that is close to the person, they should have done something, they should have intervened, they should have seen it coming. And I just feel like that's such an incredible burden and responsibility to put on someone, because it's just like someone dying of cancer. I mean, how many people do we know I had that experience with a good friend who literally died, and people were angry at him because he didn't share it, and they didn't know. I mean, so people in our company, in our environment, in our circles, who are sick with any number of illnesses that we don't know about. April, you often talk about high functioning. Tell us what you mean by that, because again, I think when people think of depressed people or people who are depressed, there's this notion that they're in the bed and they haven't showered for days. They haven't combed their hair. They haven't gone out, that they're isolated. But Chesley was going around the country as a spokesperson for the pageant. And, she was on the red carpet. She was a red carpet host interviewing celebrities. And
yes,
she was doing her thing out there.
Yes. There's a few things that I will say. Chesley, with high functioning really just means that she could get through her day. She could function. And one thing that I've often noted is that the Chesley that you saw on TV and the Chesley that people saw at functions, part of her job as a red carpet host is to smile, is to bring a persona of cheer. And sometimes that can be mistaken for her truest emotion at that moment, because her job requires, and there are many people whose job requires them to wear that uniform of a smile and a cheerful expression. But Chesley, in the sense that she was high functioning, she was a high achiever. She'd been that her entire life. But there were moments when Chesley wore that look of depression. And I saw that when I would call her sometimes in the evening, and I knew what tools she gave me to provide support to her when she was in that state. It's most closely related to persistent depressive disorder, when it's just a low depression, almost as this low hum, like this dark cloud that's just going to follow you. And in her final note to us, she alluded to that it follows me in these happy moments, in my achievements. It's just always there, but she learned how to function through it.
Jasmin, help us understand that. Is that common, uncommon, that you see people like Chesley who are incredibly high achievers who have learned, as April said, to put on that mask? Is that typically what you see in your research, or is it the person I described that can't get out of bed, that is not functioning, that has cut themselves off from friends and family?
And my answer to you is that it's both. It's absolutely both. You see that the more stereotypical, right, depression that people maybe, again, can notice is when you're in bed, is when you're not withdrawing from other people, is when you're not speaking, right? But so often it is exactly how April described, right? Because everyone is different. And with, again, high functioning depression isn't necessarily a specific diagnosis, but the characteristics are 100% there, where you think about what drives depression. Like you said, having to show up in a space where your permanent job is to be happy and to cultivate happiness in others and to express endless joy. That pressure and what that could do to someone who's struggling with things internally could absolutely lead to those more what we call visible signs of depression, right? But again, if all we're seeing is social media, how often across the board do we not see what's really within somebody, right? So absolutely, I have seen this in my profession, in my career as, again, a doctoral student in psychology. I have absolutely seen depression present in both ways.